All right, so we're going to look at human population now. So we looked kind of at more other organisms and how they have their carrying capacity and the effects. Now we're going to look at human population growth, and then we'll go into the effects that we have. Oops. Here we go. All right, so the current world population as of right now, so we have 7,774,881,600. Oh, now we're up to 700. So it's increasing extremely fast. So as I'm talking right now, there's so many births occurring. So the birth rate is much higher than the death rate. So if you notice down below, it says today that there was 245,200 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, keep going up, births, and the deaths you can actually count. So 102,963, 4, 5. It's much slower. So that means that our population is increasing. So we have a positive growth rate. So as I've been talking, we already went up 100 people in our population. So looking at the top countries in the world, so China has about 1.4 billion people. India has about 1.37, so almost 1.4 billion. And then there's a major gap there because next you look at the United States, we're number 3, and we have 330 million. So that's much lower compared to China and India, who have much higher population. So looking at the population over time, so you can see it's that J-shaped curve. So it was going up kind of slow, and then we have how it's doubling each time, and it just goes extremely fast over the last 100 or so years. So our growth rate, so as I had said, we have a positive growth rate. So positive means it is increasing over time. If we had a negative growth rate, then that would mean it was decreasing over time. So as we're looking at the entire world, we have a positive growth rate, but it has decreased over time. So it used to be about 2%. Now we're down to about 1%. So basically we're increasing by 1% every year. Find it. So this shows you the world density. So just because the population is high in certain areas doesn't mean that the entire country is just flooded. It's the cities that you're looking at or certain places in that country that have much higher density. So you can see looking for us, you can see that New York, Florida, and California have very high population density. So there's a lot of people in these areas. All right, so thinking back to the carrying capacity. So when do you believe that human population will reach capacity? Do you think we've already reached capacity? Why do you think this? So this is basically up for your opinion. As of right now, the graph still shows that we're kind of like reaching that peak. It's hard to tell. It does show it's like capping off a little bit because the population growth rate has decreased, so the growth has slowed down a little bit. But we're not sure if this is the carrying capacity or if we're going to keep going. Some people might argue that there are places on Earth that are already starving and poverty, not enough places to live. So people could argue that we have already reached that carrying capacity. So if you would like to, you could go on to footprintcalculator.org to see what your impact is on the environment. I know some of you have done this last year or in middle school. If you have done this before, you don't have to, but it is extremely interesting to look at. For me, for example, when I do the footprint calculator, it shows that if everybody in the world acted like Miss Amy, then we would need approximately 3 Earths to be able to accommodate everybody. So basically, I'm hogging a lot of resources, which is not good. But I think a major thing that most people don't realize is running water and how much waste we have with that. I feel like that is my biggest issue is water waste. So we're gonna watch a quick video. I think this video is great because it shows you a different perspective of the world. So you can see that only 5 out of 100 people can speak English. Everybody else has different languages. The amount of people that don't have running water, that don't have places to live, it's crazy when you put it into perspective of how well people have it. So looking at how different people live around the world, let's see. So this, if I remember right, it's a little outdated, but it's really cool to look at. You can see different areas of where people live. I cannot remember which place this was. I think it was China, Japan. Like I said, I'm not 100% sure where all these places are, so I'll just scroll through so you can look at them. So this one is supposed to represent the USA, so you can see like how outdated it is. This is probably like late 80s, early 90s. But like I said, it just shows a good perspective of what other places look like. Things that people think of as necessities that they have in their homes. So looking at different places, so one of the most populated cities in the world is Shanghai, China. So they have 26.32 million people in that city. So if you think about that, Connecticut is double the size of Shanghai, the city, but we only have 3.57 million people. So they have 26 million people in a spot that is half the size of Connecticut. Insane, the amount of people in this small area. So looking at New York City, so they have 8.6 million people, but it's much smaller than Shanghai. So it is also extremely populated. So New York's population density is 27,000 people per square mile, whereas Shanghai is about 11,000 people per square mile. So New York City is actually more populated than Shanghai per square mile, which is crazy to think when you look back at this, and it just seems like it's so intense. But really, the city right next to us is more populated than this. So Macau, China is the highest population density in the world. There's 48,000 people per square mile. So looking at these pictures, it doesn't do it much justice. So this data was from a couple years ago, so I looked it up, and they're actually up to 56,000 per square mile. That's a lot of people. So how did it grow to that point? So back to population growth. So population growth is what we call exponential. So it has a J-shaped curve, and a population is going to continue to grow until there are limiting factors. So something that's going to stop it from growing. So what would be some limiting factors for us as humans? So think about medicine, diseases, cancer, food, shelter. There's a lot of different things, and it's very similar to those animals in the wild. Actually have very similar limiting factors. So looking at human population, it's been exponential for these last couple hundred years, but it hasn't always been that way. So looking over time, it grew extremely slow. So what's different now compared to back then? So looking when it's growing super slow, it starts to spike after we have oil drilling. So oil is extremely important. It can be used for electricity, for heating houses. So finding oil, it was extremely essential for us to grow as humans. So you see there's a little bump here, and then it goes back down. So that is the Black Plague, and there's also lower temperatures during that time. So we have disease, we have famine, running out of food. If you remember the potato famine from history class, those are some things that showed the population to drop back down. So in the 1400s, we start to have more technology for agriculture, so being able to mass produce food, which became extremely essential to being able to support large populations. So then we have the Industrial Revolution, technological advances. So medicine is extremely important. If you take anatomy, we'll go into a little bit more of the history of medicine and how it came to be. But we'll talk about how there was a lot of things that were ineffective, and it wasn't until this time that we start to have all these things that are helping us to survive longer, to survive birth, even though you have defects. So we're able to allow our population to grow much faster, and it's mostly due to medicine and technology. All right, so the last topic, demography. Definition of this is going to be the study of human populations and how they change over time. So we can actually look at the patterns. So populations, is it linear or exponential? So you should be shouting it's exponential. And can the human population grow forever? Why or why not? No. So if there are limiting factors, that's going to prevent the population from growing. So we have Thomas Malthus. So he predicted that war, famine, and disease would limit the human population growth rate. So he was correct about this, that different limiting factors are going to prevent the human population from continuing to grow. So looking at different places around the world, so looking at the US, Japan, and Europe, as we said, our growth rates have slowed dramatically. So if you think about the boomer age, so that's when people needed their children in order to support themselves. So basically working on the farm or working in the factory. So they'd have many children in order to help support the family. So if you look at your grandparents, they probably have many siblings, whereas you might have a few. So this is called a demographic transition. So this is going to be a change in the birth and the death rate. So when you see a demographic transition, it could be that the population has increased or decreased. So looking at the history, so the birth rates were high and the death rates were high in the beginning. So even though they were having or trying to have many children, the children were not surviving due to technology and medicine that were not available. So then we have the death rate start lowering. So there's sanitation, nutrition, medicine. So all the things we need for our population to be able to grow. So now more children are surviving. More adults are living to an old age. So during this phase, the birth rate remained high as the death rate began to lower. So this is where the growth rate is going to increase and the population will grow. So are there any countries where demographic transition has completely occurred? There are a few of them. So worldwide population is still growing exponentially, however. Most people live where the transition is not complete. So for us, our population growth rate, I believe it's about 0.8. I'm not 100%. All right, so the birth and death rate, so these are pretty obvious. So birth rate is going to be the number of births or who is born, and death rate is the number of deaths or who has died. So in looking at a population growth rate, you also have to look at immigration and emigration. So those who are moving into the country or immigrating are added to the population, and those who are moving out or emigrating, those need to be taken away from the population in certain areas. So the two equations that you need to know. So in order to get the growth rate, or R, you need to take the number of births divided by the total population minus the number of deaths over the total population. So B stands for the births, D stands for deaths, and N stands for the total population. So once you have your rate, you can find the amount of growth that is going to occur, or how many people will be added or subtracted to the population. So you have N, as we said, the total population. Then you have 1 plus R, so your growth rate, which you just calculated. Then you have T, which is going to be time. So depending on the amount of time is going to depend on how much growth is going to occur. So we're going to practice using the equations. So the first word problem is a population of 100 coyotes are introduced to an area of Sugarbrook State Park. Over the next year, 40 coyotes die and 60 coyotes are born. What is the population growth rate of the coyote population? Is the population increasing or decreasing? first we need our equation. So R equals B over M minus D over M. And then the givens. So we're given there's 100 coyotes, 40 die, 60 are born. Right, so then you just plug it in. So the birth rate, so we have 60 births, 100 total population, minus 40 over 100. So then you can plug this in the calculator. So you should get 0.2. So this is a growth rate, so it's going to grow by 0.2%. So how do we know that it's going to grow? Because it's a positive number. The only way that the population is going to decrease is if this was a negative number, but it's not, it's positive. So then the next word problem. A dandelion plant has a rapid life history pattern and can produce many seeds in a short amount of time. At Plainfield Town Hall in early spring, there were 40 dandelion plants. The growth rate for dandelions is 0.45 dandelions per month. After 4 months, how many dandelion plants will there be? Now we have 40 dandelions. And it grows at 0.45 per month. How many after 4 months? So we know our equation is N1 plus R to T. So we know we start with 40 dandelions. The growth rate is 0.45. So if you do the math out, you should get about 177 if you round up. So that's how many will be added to the population in 4 months. So the next one, a population of 265 swans live in Moosup Pond. The birth rate is 0.341 swans per year. The death rate is 0.295 per year. After 5 years, how many swans will be in the pond? All right, so we start with 265 swans. We have births, 0.341 per year. Deaths, 0.295 per year. And then we have 5 years. So this one you have to take it to the next step. So you have to take the birth rate minus the death rate. So we have 0.34, that should be 1, minus 0.295. .046. That will be the growth rate. So then N, we start with 265. And 5 years. Then you just plug it into your calculator. Should get about 332. All right, so I want you guys to try this one on your own. So just pause, try to do the math, and then I'll show you the answers in a few seconds. The last topic is going to be age structure diagrams. So demographers use this in order to compare gender profiles, age groups, etc. So I'm going to explain the breakdown. So looking at the first one, so you can see we have males on the left, females on the right, and it's going to show you the age groups. So the bottom most is going to be 0 to 14 years, the middle age group is going to be 15 to 44, and then the upper age group is going to be 45 and older. So if you have a large bottom in this structure diagram, that's going to mean that the population is expanding. If it's approximately the same levels, then that's going to be a stable population. That means its growth rate is going to be approximately 0. And then the last one, if the bottom of the structure is smaller, that means it is declining. So you don't have to worry about the top. This is predicting what's going to happen in the future. So you're looking at the bottom layers. So the bottom layer, if it's large, that means it's expanding. If it's small, it's declining. If it's middle, pretty much average amongst the layers, that means it is stable. So looking at the United States in 2005, so you can see that the bottom is approximately the same. It might be a little bit smaller than our upper group. So you can consider this kind of stable to declining, depending on how you're looking at the situation. But as you can see, just like I was showing in the other ones, you can see the male on the left, female on the right. You can see the different age groups. So you can actually see where the population is the largest. So in this, it's that like boomer age group. So where you have those larger family structures. So you have like 5, 8 kids. So you have a lot of siblings. Whereas now it's not as much, so it's much lower. So like I said, male versus female, you can see the age groups, you can see the population. You guys are going to do your own example to create your own graph using data. I'll post this on Google Classroom for you. All right, so comparing, so the United States in 2014, so here you can see it's a lot more stable than the 2005 picture. Whereas you can see Rwanda and Africa, you can see that this one, the population is increasing. The bottom is much larger than the rest of the structure. All right, so quick recap on growth rate. So as long as the growth rate is 0, the population will remain stable. So that means the population is not going to increase, it's not going to decrease, it's going to stay the same. Population is already high as it is, so we can see the serious damage that has been done to the environment. So relating this back to what's been going on now, there's been a lot of posts about how the environment is doing much better. The smog has cleared up. There's animals that have been declared endangered that we're now seeing much more of them. There's a lot of serious damage to the environment due to human population growth. Damage to the global economy, so we're kind of seeing that now too. So can science, technology, and changes in society control these problems? Yes, like I was just saying, you can see it right now.